Hi, and welcome to the Tree School Online. I'm Julie Woodward with the Oregon Forest Resources Institute. It is my pleasure to be your host for today's Tree School Online webinar. Tree School Online is a production of the OSU Forestry and Natural Resources Extension Program and the Partnership for Forestry Education. We want to give recognition to the Oregon Forest Resources Institute for contributing to this project and to the U.S. Forest Service and the Oregon Department of Forestry for providing a grant. Tree School Online webinars are offered every first and third Tuesday of the month through June. Also, there's another series of forestry webinars being offered by OSU Extension for Eastern Oregon Forest. Please visit the Tree School Online page on knowyourforest.org, the website for updates and registration for both series. Some housekeeping details. You probably are familiar with Zoom, but you should have a toolbar either located on the top or bottom of your screen, and many features can be accessed from that toolbar. Your audio and video is turned off for all the participants. You'll just see the panelists today. Written questions, please, in the Q&A box. We'll be trying to get through as many questions as we can, so please feel free to type questions you have in there. The chat, we ask that you use that today for any problems or general comments, and that'll be monitored throughout by Alicia Christensen from OSU Extension. We do have some resources we're going to mention today, and those can be found on the Tree School Online Guide class page. And you can get those, again, from the Know Your Forest website or through the OSU website. And you can just click on the webinar description and look above each webinar description is a link to the instructor resources. The webinars are being recorded. They will be archived as on YouTube, and they'll be accessible again from those Tree School Online pages. We will use polls throughout this webinar, mainly at the beginning and the end, and it should pop up on your screen. If it doesn't, you should be able to click on the polls button and you'll be able to fill those in. The views and opinions expressed by our speakers today are theirs alone and not those of OSU, OFRE, or the Partnership for Forestry Education. And I'm excited today. We are bringing a presentation about landowner incentives and resources with Andrew Owen, Ryan Gordon, and Steve Rain. And let me tell you a little bit about these three presenters. And Ryan Gordon is the Family Forest Land Coordinator with the Oregon Department of Forestry. He's housed with the Private Forest Division at ODF's headquarters in Salem. His work focuses on building and supporting the department's forest landowner assistant programs. Ryan has a PhD in forest social science from OSU. Much of his professional career has been focused on supporting partnerships and collaborative efforts around natural resource issues in Oregon. He grew up in Southern Oregon, where his family still owns forest land. Andrew Owen is the state forester for the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service based out of Portland. In his role, he focuses on providing technical forestry assistance to the NRCS field offices and work alongside ODF and other partners to deliver assistant programs to forest landowners in Oregon. He has spent the majority of his career assisting private landowners to help them achieve their goals through technical and financial assistance, and he specializes in fire and fuels reduction planning. And Steve Rain is joining us today as a owner of 200 acres of forest land in Clackamas County along the Sandy River. And Steve, before this property was owned by Steve, it was previously logged and had sparse reforestation done before they purchased the land. So he spent the last 20 years doing removal of invasive species, tree planting, and thinning young stands to promote forest health. So I appreciate all three of them joining us today, and I'll ask Ryan if he'll come on and tell us a little bit about what they're going to share today.
Great, thank you, Julie, and appreciate you hosting today, and welcome everybody. Good afternoon. I'm just going to start with a real quick overview of where we're headed today, and then we'll pivot to that first poll that Julie was talking about. I'm just going to make a few introductory comments to kind of set the stage for our discussion, and then hand it over to Andrew, who's going to provide some pretty good detail on a lot of the programs available through the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And it's really great to have Steve join us as well today. He's going to talk some about his experiences and perspectives in working with a number of different landowner assistance and cost share programs. And then I'll kind of close things out with a few more tips and tricks and some overviews of some additional programs. I did want to mention up front, that we typically do this, of course, in person at Clackamas Tree School, and it's traditionally been a great opportunity for some good back and forth conversation. It's a little bit harder in this format, so we're going to do our best to try to get as much information across as we can, and please do ask good questions, and that'll help us have a little dialogue among the instructors. So Julie will set up the poll here.
Thanks, Ryan. So if you've joined us before, we'd like to, or if this is your first time, welcome. We'd like to start with getting a little bit to know more about you, since we can ask those questions like Ryan mentioned. So tell us, if you will, what we're asking about today is, it looks like, sorry about that, we launched opening poll there. Now we've got the right one launched. So we're asking today, where are you from, and about yourself, and are you a woodland owner or natural resource professional, and then if you own any acres of forest land. So just help us learn a little bit about you today. Looks like we have a little over 65 people joining the conversation today, so it sounds like it's a great turnout. It's really a topic of interest. We know people all across the state that this is something, landowners at some point often need to reach out and find that more resources and incentives. So right now it looks like we have people from all corners of the state coming in. So I'll just give you a few more seconds to fill that in. If we can get, hopefully the polls popped up on that. And if you can just click those 3 questions, that'd be great. All right, so thanks to everyone who's voting on the poll today, and I appreciate, again, you joining us, and encourage you to ask questions as we go in the Q&A button. And I will share, looks like most of us still are coming from the Willamette Valley, but it looks like people from each corner of the state, also Washington State's joining today, and it looks like even people around the U.S. and even one outside the U.S. So we don't get that one very often. Or someone just wanted to have fun on Groundhog's Day and click a little further out. So again, 78%, a large majority of you are woodland owners, and then we have some professionals coming in, getting some of this valuable information. And then how many acres of forest land do you own or manage is across the board. So we have from no ownership to all the way up over 1,000 acres. So again, that's pretty scattered and evenly distributed. So thanks everyone for joining in the poll today. Appreciate that. And I will hand it back over to Ryan to take us from here. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Julie. I'm afraid we're not going to cover any programs that are available outside the U.S. today, but we will talk a lot about programs that are available not just in Oregon, but elsewhere. So even for folks not living in Oregon. To get us started though, here, I gotta try to get the slides to advance at the right time. There we go. I always like to start with just a quick overview of forest land ownership in Oregon to kind of help set the stage. And it was actually serendipitous that I received today from Mike Clousey at OFRI a link to the latest version of the Oregon Forest Facts website. This is a website that's updated and maintained by OFRI. And there's also a small little publication that goes along with it. They've just updated everything, and that's available online at the URL that you see there. I like to bring this up a little bit, in part to kind of answer the question of why do we offer incentives and technical assistance to small forest landowners. And, my perspective on it is that if you look at the ownership of Oregon's forests and the management of Oregon forests, as you see here, they're predominantly federally owned. About 2/3 are in federal or other public ownership. But that means the other third is in private ownership. And of that, about 12% of you are smaller landowners. So we define that as being less than 5,000 acres of forest land. And the forests that you all own and manage provide a lot of public benefits. And they also happen to be primarily at the interface around a lot of our urban areas and have a lot of importance in quality of life and supply a lot of important ecosystem functions to all of us living around the state. Also, this gives you a sense of kind of who's making decisions about forest management. And when we talk about large-scale issues like forest health, wildfire, et cetera, it's really important to take a landscape view and to think about how we might work across a lot of those different ownership boundaries. So I think that's just a little kind of nice perspective to start with as we ease into this conversation. Moving on real quick, I wanted to give a high-level overview of the Oregon Department of Forestry. Overall, the department's primary mission is to support the active management of forests to maintain a working landscape that produces economic, environmental, and social benefits. And to do that, we have programs that focus primarily on private and state-owned lands. So you're probably familiar with wildfire suppression as being one of our primary missions. We also manage about 750,000 acres of Board of Forestry owned lands. And increasingly now, we are also coordinating with our federal land managers, especially the Forest Service, to assist with the management of federally owned lands through our Federal Forest Restoration Program. So again, that kind of speaks to what I was saying earlier, the importance of looking at an entire landscape and trying to manage across those boundaries. And of greatest importance for today's conversation is that ODF provides technical assistance for many of the federal programs that are designed to support private forest landowners, small woodland owners. And we don't have a lot of dedicated state funding for that work, so we really do rely on our partners, primarily in the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, the Forest Service, state and private forestry. A lot of us are familiar with the National Forest side of the Forest Service, but they also have programs that provide support for the states and for smaller landowners like many of you. We work with OSU Extension, the Oregon Forest Resources Institute, and the list through the Partnership for Forestry Education. So I'm going to pause there. And speaking of partnership, I want to invite Andrew to turn on his camera and come on and talk through some of the programs that NRCS offers. They're a primary partner for us in helping small woodland owners. So Andrew, please take it away. And I'll get your slide up.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending. And Julie and Ryan, thanks for kicking that off. Really looking forward to today's discussion. I think this is where I spend most of my time, is helping landowners access both technical and financial assistance to help get at the objectives that they're really after when coming to manage their forest lands. If you advance to the next slide. So what I'd like to talk about in the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to start at a very high level and work through the way that we structure our farm bill delivery here in Oregon. It looks a little bit different in each state. So what we do, and I'll get into some further details at a very high level, we're going to start at the 20,000 foot view. And then my hope is that we can navigate our way through down to some very detailed specifics of how it can work for you locally at the local level and at your forest land. And then we'll kick it over to Steve and he can show some examples of how this process has worked for him. So we'll start covering the strategic approach to conservation. And then right here, perfect. So the way we operate in Oregon is under the strategic approach to conservation. It's at the direction and leadership of our state conservationists, and at the local leadership from our field offices, we deploy the strategic approach. In Oregon, we use this approach to administer our EQIP dollars. With that, we work with our partners at the local, state, and federal level. We work with Oregon tribes, NGOs, universities, and nonprofits to deliver conservation assistance to the ground. Next slide, Ryan. Can you go to the next slide there, Ryan? Maybe a lag. Can you go back just one, please? I think you missed one. All right, we'll skip that. So with the strategic approach, the way that the process works is that we're partner-centric, cost-effective, and focused and target. Those are really our missions and how the strategic approach is the framework under the strategic approach. So with that, we work with the local through a locally led process, through local working group meetings to identify the most pertinent resource concerns that we find at a local area. We try and tackle very specific needs that are brought to us through local working group, through stakeholders, through different scientific analysis that we run. And I think what's important to you landowners is, as a landowner, it's important to know that you can and should provide input into this process. By working with their local offices, you can help at the local level to raise natural resource concerns and also provide solutions. This local input is one of the beginning steps in our conservation strategic approach. So we have that upper tier or upper outer crust of the onion, and then as we start peeling layers of the onion, you'll find a long-range natural resource plan. And in those plans, we'll have what we call conservation implementation strategies. So these strategies are how we tackle ongoing natural resource and resource concerns across the landscape. So you'll have a county-wide natural resource plan and then multiple conservation implementation strategies. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. That's where the funding is applied. That's where we have targeted acres that we're going after, where we have outreach strategies, where we have our budgets built, and we have specific practices, which I'll get into a little bit later, to address those bigger long-term, long-range plans. So the strategies really do tier to that long-range natural resource management plan. Next slide, Ryan. So here's an example. If you navigate your way to our webpage, Natural Resources Conservation Service under USDA, you'll see how across the state we have multiple conservation implementation strategies. Each of these strategies, again, was developed through local working group process, where we've identified one or two natural resource concerns that we feel we can address within a very short time period. We can target funding and we can target practices within these areas. If you go to the next slide, I'll zoom in one more layer and show you a couple examples of how this works. There we go. So this is one example of a conservation implementation strategy where in the Baker watershed, we've developed a forest health partnership. The resource concerns that we're focused on in this priority area are wildfire and biomass accumulation. So we've targeted a very specific geography where the local working group has said, we feel that we can really make a tangible change. We can address the fire hazard and biomass accumulation in these priority watersheds in this priority area. We dedicate funding, we dedicate resources, and we have very specific practices that'll help us address these resource concerns. So in this area, we can do brush management, develop fuel breaks, forest stand improvement, things of that nature, where we've identified that those are the right tools in this geography to really make a tangible change. And you'll see these all across the state that they take different shape and form. Some of them are quite large. Some of them may be more of a small watershed where it's the priority watershed for clean drinking water to a local area. And we've identified that as the priority area to treat. Some of them take a little bit different shape. Ryan, if you go to the next slide, I'll show you a project that we have in Benton, Lynn, Lane, and Lincoln counties. So this is a multi-county approach focusing on forest resistance and resilience. So plant structure and composition are a little bit out of whack, or in some cases very out of whack. And we've identified that that's the highest resource concern in that area within the forest landowner group. So in this case, the strategy is going to improve forest diversity, which will help create a more resistant and resilient ecosystem through different disturbances. So you'll see we've got a whole slew of partners that help on these projects and a whole list of different conservation practices that if you're in that area and you're an eligible landowner, we can help you develop a plan to deploy these practices to address some of those common resource concerns. Next slide, Ryan. So we do have a number of different farm bill programs. That's kind of that high level, the strategic approach and the conservation implementation strategies are really the high level, how we look at the problems across the state. And then the programs are how we implement. So we have a number of different farm bill programs that are offered in Oregon. And I think what a really neat fact that I always like to throw out is that on average, the USDA NRCS invests about $8 million a day, every day, into different conservation systems to help producers stay profitable and productive. So I'll get into a few more details of the individual programs themselves. If you advance to the next slide. So our main program, and one that most people it's kind of the entry or the gateway into working with the NRCS, is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. So this program is how this is the main program that we use to administer the conservation implementation strategies. And this EQIP program is available to non-industrial private forest landowners that work through different eligibilities that we have in different ranking and screening. But this is our number one. This is the most common and most popular program that we offered for forest landowners across the state. Next program, next slide. The next program that we offer, and we've been very successful in Oregon at addressing landscape resource concerns, is the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And this program is in coordination between the NRCS and its partners to deliver conservation assistance to producers and landowners. Under partnership agreements, the NRCS and its partners leverage and target their respective resources to deliver conservation assistance to producers and landowners, again, to address priority natural resources. And in Oregon, oftentimes what we find is that we'll have a CIS, a conservation implementation strategy, we'll get a lot of traction, and then a lead partner will turn that into a large regional conservation partnership program. And these tend to be in the multi-million dollars of funding that's available to landowners within one of the boundaries of an RCPP. Very excellent program. And again, in Oregon, we've been very successful. I'll show you a map in a few slides of where you can locate if you are within one of the RCPP areas. Next programmer. The next program is the Conservation Stewardship Program. So this is quite similar to EQIP, although this is it's a little bit more advanced. So this is for landowners that have gone through the EQIP program or have demonstrated some ongoing stewardship. This is kind of the gold standard of stewardship. A lot of different bundles and different enhancements that you can do to really take your land to that next level of conservation. It is the largest conservation program in the United States, and we've got a whole slew of different practices that are available to landowners, things like enhanced resiliency to weather and market vitality, decreasing the need for agriculture inputs. We have sequential and patch burning and prescribed fire, different implementation of fuel breaks, things of that nature. So we have our general EQIP, and then this conservation stewardship program is really the gold standard and a fantastic program that's offered all across the state in Oregon. Next slide. We also have a number of different easement programs. So these are conservation easements to help protect properties, whether they're agriculture land, wetlands, and we also have the Healthy Forest Reserve program that's active in the state, where it's targeting non-industrial private forest landowners to use perpetual easements and helping in the recovery of the northern spotted owl. So these programs, again, they work with landowners, land trust, and other entities where we want to protect and enhance through restoration agreements, where we're actually doing work on the ground, and we're also protecting them either in the short term, like a 30 to 50-year agreement, or in perpetuity by applying a conservation easement across the land. I think I have two more programs, then I'll get into some of the weeds about how you can work with us on your property in particular. So as Ryan mentioned, we're the U.S. Forest Service and the the Natural Resource Conservation Service, we're both under the USDA, and we work very closely together. This is a program that came out about 10 years ago, which is called the Joint Chiefs Landscape Restoration Partnership. Again, much like the RCPP, we've been very successful in Oregon in landing a number of these projects that bring in millions and millions of dollars to the state, targeted primarily on wildfire risk reduction around where you have federal land, Forest Service land, and adjacent non-industrial private forest land. So we work hand in hand with the Forest Service, targeting landscape issues and trying to reduce the risk of fire, for example, or forest health issues that we're seeing across boundaries. This comes to us as a competitive grant that we work on over the course of many years to try and secure funding to bring back to Oregon. And we partner with ODF and a whole slew of other partners to help deliver this program across boundary. And I think I have one other program to touch on, which is really, really neat. If you would advance the slide, Ryan. So the last program that I'll touch on is the Conservation Innovation Grants. So this is a really, really neat program that helps to be an early adopter of new technologies and new ways of doing business. So a couple examples of things that we've done here in Oregon, those 3 bullets down at the bottom there are projects that were awarded in the last few years that have a forestry feel to them. So for example, we have partners that applied to generate some new technologies and an innovative approach to managing for qualifying developing late cereal conditions on private lands. We have forging a path to carbon markets for private landowners. And then one that's gotten a lot of traction lately is innovations in biochar. So using forest residual waste to create biochar to either put back on the forest as carbon sinks or to use in an agriculture application. So a lot of these are the early adopters, and then they would turn back into practices that we can apply onto non-industrial private forest landowners' grounds. So you may be wondering, all right, we've got all these really cool programs. Well, how do we get them on my land? If you're a forest landowner, how do you access some of these programs? The best way to do it is to locate your local office. We have offices in all the counties across the state. We have district conservationists, soil conservationists, and then oftentimes we partner with ODF, so you can have that walk in the woods with a professional and start working through the conservation process. So the best way to get access to some of these programs, like I said, contact your local district conservationist and just get the ball rolling. We also use technical service providers or consulting foresters. They can help develop forest management plans that you can bring into our office, and we can work through the steps of getting you access to some of these programs. One of the best ways to get involved is to attend the local working group meetings. That is really the best place where you can have your voice heard. You can elevate up the flagpole, the resource concerns that you're seeing on your property in your local area. And then I'm sure Steve's going to help make the point. Be patient. There's a lot of different program rules. You're working with a federal agency, so we have to check a lot of boxes. So the best piece of advice that I can offer is be patient and be persistent, but also understand the timelines. We have certain due dates throughout the year of when we have to apply, or when we have application deadlines, when we have contract deadlines. So the more you understand about our process, the higher the likelihood of success. Next slide, Ryan. You go, there we go. So like I said, we're broken. The way that we operate in Oregon, we have 4 main basins. And you'll see how those are broken on the right-hand side there. But again, each county has a field office with a district conservationist and a number of other staff, from foresters to engineers to wildlife biologists. So depending on the need, we can try and pair you with the right specialist to come out into your office. Again, like on the other page that we showed the map of the CISs, this is where you can locate the county you're in. Each county is hyperlinked, and once you click on the hyperlink, it'll take you right to the main page within the county with the contact information, location, phone numbers, email, and all that information. Next slide, Ryan. Once you get to that point and you start working on a relationship at the local level, what we do is we work through a 9-step planning process. Again, this can take a lot of different shapes. This may be done just one-on-one with you and the district conservationist. This may come in the form of technical assistance through Oregon Department of Forestry or consulting forester, but each project works through this same 9-step process. The reason we do that is that we found that it's a very streamlined way to go through the planning process to get you access to not only the technical assistance that you may need, but it helps get a streamlined process to financial assistance. So what you can expect is a walk in the woods. Get out with a professional forester and start to identify the problems and opportunities that you may have. You'll work through the different landowner objectives, whether it's wildfire risk reduction, you want to create habitat, you want to grow timber for revenue in the future. You'll start to determine those objectives, and then based on the landowner objectives, we can identify the resources through forest stand inventories, through different stand delineations, and then we do the analysis. We work through the different parts of the analysis on your property. We'll formulate alternatives, and then we'll work with you to evaluate those alternatives. And then collectively, we will help you make a decision on what's best for your land and which practices would help you to get to the objectives that we laid out in step 2. And then step 8 is to implement. That's where we help you find local contractors. We help determine what the long-term desired future conditions look like, and then we begin the implementation. Step 9 is where we take a look back and we evaluate if our project was successful, if we need to make little tweaks here and there, and then what the monitoring and operations would look like going into the future. So this is basically step 1. So this is going to be the identify problems and opportunities. We can help you, again, through a consulting forester or through ODF to develop a long-term forest management plan. This really lays out the objectives. This helps for you to relate your objectives into a plan and then to formulate what that plan is going to look like into the future. It's kind of the blueprint or the roadmap of how to help effectively manage your land into the future. Go ahead, Ryan. So this is generally step 1. We can help, we've got some great access to mapping information. We can do stand type mapping. We can help with soils mapping. You name it, we can help put a map to it and determine what the needs within these different compartments may be. So one of the biggest values landowners find is access to some really outstanding maps, and with a good map helps to determine the course of action. The next step in that process is to develop forest stand characteristics. This is where a forester will come out and work with you within each of those stands that was delineated to inventory all the resources that are out there. That'll help us know what the stand trajectory is and what we can do at what time frames we should be doing different work to get that land in the trajectory that you would like. And the last slide. So this is a list of the different practices that are offered at present for our EQIP program. So if you're a forest landowner and we've worked through all those different steps, these are the different practices that we can deploy on your land to help you get to your resource goals. So anything from access control, if you've got, if you want to keep certain ungulates out of your property or in your property, if you've got forest stand improvement, if there's forest trails and landings, forest stand improvement and forest slash treatment are 2 of the most commonly used practices across the state, but we do have a wide-ranging conservation practices that we do offer. So the first step, again, is to get in touch with the local conservationist, start working on a forest management plan, and we'll help you apply the right practices to the right pieces on your property. And I think that's all I had, Ryan. If you go to the next slide. I think there's one more. Okay, that was it. I think that's all I had for now, and I'm happy to take questions.
Hey, thanks, Andrew. Good information. We have a question from somebody about, is there any help for 5 acres or less for helping make a long-term forest plan? Can you maybe talk a little bit about acreage and who qualifies?
Sure. So we don't discriminate on size. So we do have certain ranking and eligibility criteria that the landowners have to go through. So there's certain adjusted gross income. So ultimately, the answer is yes, there's absolutely, we don't discriminate on size. We can find a 1/4 acre property may have issues that are within a CIS that we've all determined are the priorities for that area. So absolutely, there's no size limitations on non-industrial at this point.
Great. So we don't have very many questions coming in, but we'll give people a minute maybe here. I think I see some popping up. So one person asked again, what does EQIP, how long does the EQIP process take? So you talked about the 9 steps, but maybe give an idea of what that might look like for time-wise.
Sure. So let's just assume that we've got a conservation implementation strategy already in your area and you're within the area. A good time frame, I think, to get through the contracting and eligibility to where the chainsaw would hit the tree would reasonably would be within 6 months to a year. I think it all depends on when you get in that time frame. We kind of have a revolving window. We don't have a set time frame every year that's repeated. Generally speaking, like for an example coming up, we have an open funding pool that's going to be open on April 16th. So we'll keep that open for a period of time. We'll accept applications. If you make it in that time frame, I would say you would be within a contract within 2 to 3 months where you could start working. It just all depends on where you land. It's kind of that sliding window. So if you get in December, you're going to have to wait until the next open time frame, open application period. But usually within 6 to 12 months, I'd say you'll have a pretty good shot. Now that's if you are within one of those CIS areas. If you're not within one of the approved CIS areas, then that time frame can last a little bit longer, and it goes through the local working group process, and it can take a little bit longer. But if you're within one of the funding pool areas, it's a pretty rapid approach. We've got it streamlined pretty quickly.
Great. So Sean Hart asked, can you please speak a bit about what NRSCS is doing to help give small landowners access to carbon markets, if anything?
Well, that's a very good question. So the one that I know of recently, and I believe it ended, I would have to look, we did have a regional conservation partnership program up in the northwest part of the state for unlocking carbon markets. As of now, I don't know that we have any available funding pools for small landowners. There's a lot of buzz around that. I think there's a lot of traction around that exact topic, but as of today, to speak of, I don't think we have any funding pools available for that.
Okay, good to know. So we have several questions rolling in. Just let everybody know we're going to answer a few more questions, and then we're going to move on with the presentation. And then at the end, we'll try and get back to everyone's questions if we don't get them all here. So keep them coming in. So Monica asked, where is the best resources to start for a forest plan? I didn't get assistance through stewardship program outside of a list of loggers.
Okay, so to develop a forest stewardship plan, we have those. They're called Conservation Activity Plan 106, and we can actually help cost share the creation of a CAP 106. Now, at present, the way that we're doing that is that, again, they have to be within one of the conservation implementation strategies, and it would work just like any other program. It's an application process. You'd work with your local conservationists. It can happen a couple different ways. So we can, through the CAP 106 program, you can hire off an approved list of technical service providers and consulting foresters, or we can help partner with Oregon Department of Forestry. We have an agreement. It's been a wonderful agreement over the last decade or so, where Oregon Department of Forestry can have stewardship foresters come out through our statewide agreement and help develop those forest management plans for private landowners. So I hope that helped answer the question.
Yeah, I think so. I think basically if they didn't get what they needed the first time, maybe they need to go back into the office and ask for a little bit more and help with their management plan, or even contact maybe another person in their area, depending on who they contacted last. So.
And feel free to contact me, and I can help if you give me your name, contact information, and local area. I can help zero in. It is, as you can tell, I just unpacked a lot of information. So understanding how it works, you can maybe take a PhD to get there. So feel free to contact me, and I can help zero into the local office where they can help you a little bit more.
Okay. Which programs are available for habitat improvement? Your wildlife's so popular.
Sure, absolutely. So that would also be within the CIS, and much like I presented on a couple slides ago, those would be the practices. So we would have within your forest management plan, you would have specific criteria that you're looking for in terms of wildlife. So it would be a certain stand structure or locations on your property where developing different composition and different structure. And then these would be the tools, for example, forest stand improvement. We would use forest stand improvement or conservation cover, for example, if you wanted to do feed plots. So it just depends, again, on the local area. If wildlife considerations have been elevated up through the local working group, that's a great way to do it, to stay in this area. We've determined that wildlife movement is a big resource concern. So you can do it that way through the Conservation Implementation Strategy, CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, which is, again, it's offered statewide. It is not confined to the Conservation Implementation Strategy. So that is offered statewide. They have a whole slew of really, really fantastic habitat creation practices. So that would be another great example of that program lends itself really well to habitat creation.
Great. Well, I think that's a great overview, Andrew. I think we'll pause there on questions and let Steve and Ryan take it from here for their presentation. Then we'll come back. I encourage people to keep sending in questions as you have them, and Andrew will join us again after we hear more from Steve and Ryan. So I think at this point, we're going to hand it over to Steve to bring in the landowner perspective. Steve, thanks for joining us.
All right. Well, thank you, Julie, and thank you, Andrew, for setting that up. And I'm very happy to share the many benefits that I have received through working with partners, both with ODF, with NRCS, my local watershed and watershed council, and my soil and water conservation district. So for me, I guess the big picture is that by working with these groups, I've been able to accomplish 10 times what I would have been able to do on my own, both because it's been able to raise my efficiency, and with the funding sources available, I've been able to implement much larger scale restoration than I would have been able to do otherwise. So that's kind of the big picture. A little bit about me. I bought 120 acres of forest land back in 1999, and it was cut over in the early 90s, and almost all of it. And the reforestation was spotty, and it was subject. The main issues with problems with reforestation were blackberries, mountain beaver, and maple resprout. Those were kind of the big three areas that really made my reforestation a challenge, or it killed off a lot of the trees that had been planted by the previous owner. So I didn't have a background in forestry. I grew up on a farm, and that was about all. I didn't know. I knew how to operate a chainsaw, and I didn't know much about trees beyond that. But thankfully, there's tree school, and soon after I bought my property, I started regularly attending tree school, and the relationships that I developed, well, the information I learned was very valuable, but even more valuable than that was the relationships I developed with different presenters or people that were tabling at tree school, and being able to tap into their expertise, knowledge, and some of these wonderful programs that are available. Let's see. So I guess kind of in the early days at tree school, I was taking the regular classes and learning about this and that, or especially things that were applicable to my property. But in probably around 2005 or 6, I signed up for a class called Show Me the Money. And it was a panel discussion by representatives from ODF, NRCS, the local soil and water conservation district. And basically it was a panel discussion, interaction, and my eyes lit up. And like I said earlier, prior to that, because of my limited knowledge and my limited ability, my restoration efforts were basically reaching the low-hanging fruit and trying to just seeing a problem and addressing it. So I was able to address maybe, 1 or 2 acres a year. I would be able to get on the blackberries or do some replanting. And I learned a lot through trial and error. But after I started tapping into some of the grant and assistance programs, I was able to greatly expand my reach. And in the first program that I got in touch with was through Oregon Department of Forestry. And basically, I believe at that point, ODF was administering a federal grant to do fire fuels reduction. And what I was able to do there was working with my local stewardship forester, identify areas that needed, that had dangerous fire fuels and very dense blackberries and brush areas that I wanted to reforest. So what I was able to do then with that program, and it was a grant, was I applied for the grant and I was able to hire a local contractor with a large track hoe with a masticator on the arm to come in and mow out massive amounts of blackberries and brush. And then, so it was a grant with a match, and my match was my labor to do thinning adjacent to the area that was being mowed out, and then doing the follow-up spraying for blackberries and the follow-up planting of appropriate trees for the area. A lot of times it was north-facing slopes or partially shaded areas, so I planted a heck of a lot of cedar trees. And so I was able to leverage my match of doing the spraying, planting, and some chainsaw work in order to get cash to pay a contractor to come in and do this heavy equipment work that I would never have been able to afford otherwise. And by doing that, it enabled me to go from being able to do 1 or 2 acres a year to being able to take on 6, 8, 12, 15 acres in one project, because I gained, as I worked along on these projects, I gained knowledge and understanding about what I could do and how I could be most efficient in going in and doing the follow-up work. So I was lucky enough to be able to get in and do that. I think it was I think I did 4 projects in about a 5-year span, and just going one after the other, and really being able to get my hands on a much larger piece of the problem, which was the brush and blackberry issues. So that program through ODF was extremely helpful in helping me get to some of my goals. And then probably around 2010 or so, those funds started drying up. That program, the money went somewhere else, or I don't know what happened, but anyway, because I had the relationships with my local stewardship forester, I talked to him about it and said, well, I have these other goals that I want to accomplish. And then I started looking more towards the stands that I had that were overly dense, and the pre-commercial thinning became the next highest priority on my plate. And what I was, Mike Haskin at the time was my stewardship forester, and I talked to him, and he said, well, you know what, if you really want to get your hands on this, you should have a forest management plan. So, and like Andrew was saying, there are cost share programs. So I think my recollection is, and this is a while back, but my recollection is that ODF, or through the federal funding, whoever it was, either NRCS or ODF, paid, like, I think 3/4 of it, and I paid 1/4 of it. I think I paid maybe $500 out of pocket, and they provided the other $1,500, something like that. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, so I was able to go and hire a stewardship forester, and I talked to him about my goals for my whole property. We walked the property. He came up with the map that you can see right here with these 8 different units, and for each unit specified a prescription for what needed to be done, and a timeline of when those things should be done. And also identified when areas would be ready for harvest, and other things that were going to go on. That plan specified almost universally in my stands, was the thing that was almost universally needed was pre-commercial thinning. So, and the plan identified that, and also blackberry removal. Those were kind of the big two. And so by having that plan, I was able to go to the NRCS and say, well, look, I have a plan, and I identified the highest priority areas where I wanted to get in and work first. And so I circled one of the units and identified about 8 or 12 acres that was in great need of pre-commercial thinning. It was an area where there was massive amount of maple resprout off of the stumps that had been logged, and one of these stumps could have 8, 10 trees coming out of them, and they take up a massive amount of space, and they were beating up the neighboring Doug fir that was struggling to get up through it. So it was an area that really needed, in order to have a healthier forest, it needed thinning. So I called up my local NRCS agent. We went out and walked the stand, and we did some preliminary measurements about how many stems per acre there were, and it was ridiculous. The number of stems per acre was through the roof, 1,000 or something like that. So I was able to enroll in the plan, and then there were a couple of different prescriptions that I had. It's not just the pre-commercial thinning, which is also called, I think, stand improvement, but also there's the associated program is the lop and scatter, and this is under the EQIP program. So basically what you do is you go in, you cut out the tree, you identify the trees you want to get rid of, you cut them out, and buck up what the things you drop. And because it's such a dense stand, every tree is a hang up. So it's basically, it's a lot of physical chainsaw work, but luckily that's work I love to do. And that's one of the beauties of the EQIP program for me, is that it is not a grant. There's not a match. It is a contract. So when I met with my NRCS agent, I filled out a massive amount of paperwork, give them my social security number, bank account information, all kinds of stuff like that. You may or may not feel comfortable with that, but you should know it up front. We developed a contract, and then I accomplished those goals by going out there and working my butt off with a chainsaw. But luckily, that's work that I love to do. And the beauty of the EQIP program is it's a contract for money for getting the job done. And if you get the job done by yourself, that's money in your pocket. If you have to hire a crew, it's money that you can use towards hiring that crew. And it's probably not going to pay all of it, but it'll pay a good substantial amount of it. But the beauty of it is that if this is work that you can do yourself, or you can do part of it yourself, you're gonna be able to either put money in your pocket, or at least get almost all of it paid for if you're gonna do a good chunk of it yourself. So since in the last 10 years, I've had a project almost every year, and the one thing that Andrew mentioned, and I'm going to really reinforce it, is that it's not something you can do if you're anxious to get going on it and you want to start doing it in 6 months. It's probably not the program for you. You need to plan it out in advance. So you need to have that conversation now if you want to be doing that thinning a year from now. The program, just because you apply for it and sign up for it, doesn't mean you're in it. You can't start the project until you get the approval if you want to get it funded. So there are hoops, there is paperwork, And it's not always, sometimes it's very frustrating. I mean, I had one time when I had this crew scheduled to come out and do holly removal, cut and stump treat holly. And I had the crew scheduled. It had been hard to get the crew lined up, and it was something that needed to be done at a certain time of year. And I talked to my NRCS folks, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we could fund that project, but we can't fund it until it gets the next funding cycle and it gets approved." Well, I had the crew coming out, and I wasn't going to wait, and so I had to just do it and pay for it myself, even though it would have been a perfect program for that to apply for funding for. So having a plan and looking forward and not being overly anxious to get it done immediately are two important aspects of it. Let's see what else. There's a couple other on some of my later, so on my first equip programs that I did with NRCS, it was pre-commercial thin, forest stand improvement, they call it, and lop and scatter, which is getting the stuff on the ground so it'll rot on the ground rather than be all hung up and cause a fire issue. Later on, what I did is in addition to those two practices, I also combined it with so pre-commercial thin, lop and scatter, then go in and spray for blackberries, which is another practice, and then go in and underplant with cedar, and then another practice is to plant shrubs that are beneficial for pollinators and for birds and the birds and the bees. So I was able to stack those different programs on top of each other. So I would have a discrete area, say a 10-acre parcel, a patch that has a distinctive forest type and a distinctive density and area that was a high priority for me. And then I would go in there with the NRCS people and ask them, what else could I do here? What's another, do you have any other ideas? And so not just going at them with your plan and saying, this is what I'm going to do, but also being open to other ideas about what to do. And like the pollinator program, that was something I'd never thought of. And I said, wow, that's a neat thing. And what I do for that is I have found out it's not that hard to propagate some of the native shrubs. So I have been in my garden, in the fall, I take cuttings from some native shrubs, I plant them in my garden and grow them for a year. The following year, I'm able to put those out into the woods, and because they've shot roots, and I'm able to enhance the habitat for pollinators. So there's several different species of native shrubs that work really well for that, and I'm able to. It's a no cost way to enhance your property and also get funding in order to do so. So for me, it's been an amazing programs, both through the ODF, Oregon Department of Forestry, and through the NRCS that have helped me to accomplish far more than I could have done on my own. And the other thing that it's done is that it's forced me to be methodical in my forestry. Before I was involved with these programs, I would address the areas that I saw. The areas along the trails, the areas along the roads, they all got tidied up. That's where I did my thinning. But now, because I'm being methodical about it and doing a whole unit, I'm actually getting to those corners where I'd never walked before, on those steep hills where it's really impossible to get to. And now I'm actually going into those areas, seeing opportunities and getting stuff done in order to improve the forest health. And that's what it's all about. Forest stand improvement. and it's a holistic process. It's not just going in there once and doing it. It's, you got to go in there and do the follow-up with the blackberries. And I found with the mountain beavers, I have more mountain beavers than anybody else I know. And I've learned a lot about dealing with mountain beavers, but that's an aside. But the thing is that, I guess my point is that the importance is to see it through. And once you see it through and you develop a relationship with those agency people, and they know that if you sign up for this program, you're going to get it done, and not only get it done, but do it right and follow through, then they are going to be much more willing to work with you and want you to succeed, because there's nothing like success to help nurture that relationship with the people that you're working with. They want to see the forest get better, and to see those little trees come up, and they want to see those forests free of those crappy blackberries that were draped all over everything. So if you can show them those kind of things, you're going to develop a relationship as a trusted partner with your stewardship forester or your NRCS representative, and you're going to be able to, approach them about other things, and they're going to say, wow, it's like, yeah, you're able to do this. Let's sign you up for this. So developing a relationship with your, for me, it started with my stewardship forester through ODF, and then grew on to being also with my NRCS reps. Developing a relationship is critical. And then I'll just kind of close out by talking about a couple of the hurdles that are going to be there. I don't want to make it sound like it's a bed of roses, and it's not, the easiest thing. You are dealing with a bureaucracy. If you're a strict libertarian, you're not going to be happy about giving them your social security number, about signing 100 different documents, about giving them your bank account information so they can wire the funds and those kind of things. There's things that might make you a little uncomfortable, but for me, it was all very much worth it. One of the other things that's one of the maybe frustrating parts is that a lot of times in these agencies, there's turnover. So you develop a relationship with one person, and then they retire or they get transferred or whatever. I mean, I've gone through 4 different NRCS representatives, 5 different stewardship foresters, but they're all nice people. They're all people that are doing this job because they want to help you, and they want to help you improve the land. And that's what it's really all about, is improving the health of the forest, because that, as Andrew said, there's benefits that go beyond your property lines if you improve the forest, for wildlife, for water, for carbon sequestration, for you people know, you're here because you know that, and because you love forests. So I guess my 2 cents is that it's been really worth it. Oh, and I wanted to mention, I don't know, probably going over time, but I wanted to mention a couple other things. In addition to ODF and NRCS, also very good people to talk to are your local soil and water conservation district folks and your local watershed folks. There's through the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, they have a program called Small Grants, and they're not so small. I think they can be up to 10 grand. But for work in riparian areas, you can access funds. If you're going to be doing improvements in riparian areas, you can access funds from them. And that's not a federal program, that's a state program. And you can contact either your local watershed council or your local soil and water conservation district folks for access to that. And then the soil and water conservation district, they have different programs. They change quite often. When I was able to access a program, I was, in addition to my original 120 acres, I also acquired an adjacent 80-acre parcel that had been a runaway tree nursery, and I wanted to take it from ag use to forestry use, and I was able to get an excellent grant from the local Soil and Water Conservation District. It was called, they call it a DOG, Dollars on the Ground grant, and I was able to pay for thousands of trees that I planted, along with a lot of the Vexar tubes and such that I was using to protect them. So I guess I'm probably going over time. I will be happy to answer questions, but I'm a believer. I've been able to get a lot done because of these grants and because of having both the technical and the financial help from the wonderful folks that are out here to help you. Oh, and one other thing I should mention is
Maybe we can loop back if it comes to mind. We probably better start moving on. I really appreciate that, Steve. That is an excellent testimonial, I think. You covered a lot of ground. And one of the things I was thinking about as I was listening to you talk through that, is you're an extremely motivated landowner and a very motivated example. So for other folks joining in, I think one of the things that's important to remember too, one of the beauties of this is a lot of it can be at your pace. And that's part of the fun of it. It doesn't have to be at warp speed. Steve's kind of gone warp speed. But a lot of it, relates back to the fact that he started with a plan and has worked forward from there. And I want to try to kind of move on here, and we'll wrap back around at the end in about 10, 15 minutes or so for some more questions. But I want to try to pick up on some of the themes that Steve has talked about, and also Andrew, and maybe try to wrap some things together and answer some questions. The first thing is that I wanted to talk through the different components of assistance. We've touched on a lot of terms. You heard Steve talking about match. So there's a few different components. The first part, and this is the sort of the primary piece that we're all engaged in, is that technical assistance component. And that is the sort of walking and talking on the ground and working together, thinking about the problems, thinking about the solutions, and developing a plan. And that can come through a number of different sources. You've heard them referred to here by both Andrew and Steve. It could be a stewardship forester from ODF. It might be somebody from OSU Extension, the Watershed Council, an SWCD. It could also be a professional forestry consultant that you hire and work with. And maybe some of those costs are offset with cost share. And that's the other side of this then, is the financial assistance. These are the funds that you can receive to help offset some of your costs, either for doing that work yourself or for working with a consulting forester or a contractor. These come in a variety of different forms. It might be a grant of either state or federal dollars. In the case of NRCS, it might be a contract that you have with them to complete tasks. There are also some tax incentives that are available. Another really important piece, and Steve mentioned this, is that sort of that sweat equity component, or the match. A lot of the programs do have a match requirement. It's typically 75-25, 75% cost share, 25% match. Some are 50-50. NRCS has set rates for a lot of the practices that they cost share, and there is typically some match built into those rates. So there's an expectation that the landowner may have to pick up some of the costs. Again, as Steve said, depending on how you choose to complete that work. So how do you navigate the process? What are some tips and tricks there? I think Steve's testimonial really talks to developing the right relationships. Find somebody locally that you know and trust and can work with, and start to network through them. It could be an ODF stewardship forester, extension forester, but it might be somebody else in your community. As you work with them and start to look around, take note of those regionally specific opportunities, sign-up periods, focus areas. You heard a lot of that in what Steve and Andrew both presented. A lot of these opportunities, they kind of move around. They come and go depending on funding, depending on different where different focus is at any particular time. And so it's good to start to kind of understand that process and get to know what's going on locally. I really want to underscore the importance of considering the development of a forest management plan. We've got a lot of different options on the table right now too. It doesn't have to be a full forest stewardship plan. It could be, but we have the ability to get landowners into cost share and assistance programs through NRCS and other providers with sort of more focused plans that are maybe specific to just some of the resource concerns that you're interested in on your property. But there really is no substitute for a full plan that kind of takes a holistic look at your property and the context that it's sitting in and helps you to set up that timeline that Steve was mentioning. And there are a few different cost share programs available. NRCS can help with that. We've got some federal funding available through ODF, through our forest stewardship program, that can help with that. So just know that assistance is available. There's also some mentoring programs as well, where you can work with an experienced individual and develop your own plan. We've got an entire tree school online class dedicated to management planning as well. It's always good to, when you're working on your management plan, to think about how it fits in with other regional or statewide strategies. You heard Andrew referring to that. A lot of these programs do have kind of some ranking criteria, and they can help to make sure that you're connecting your concerns with concerns at a larger landscape scale. And then the last point here I think is really important. You might work with a couple, 2, 3 different people as you're implementing a cost share program. And it's really important to know the role that each of those folks play in the process. So in the case of NRCS, you might be working with an ODF stewardship forester on the technical assistance piece. That might be the person you're meeting with out on the ground and working with to think about a plan and implementing that plan for your project. But your financial relationship is directly with NRCS. There are a number of programs where that's kind of the case, and so it's just important to understand those relationships. So, again, representing ODF, I wanted to take just a quick minute and highlight our stewardship foresters, because they are the folks from our side that you'd be working with in the field. They are kind of our primary point of contact for landowners, and they have a full plate. They've got a lot of responsibilities. Their primary responsibility is implementation of the Oregon Forest Practices Act, They're also involved with our fire suppression mission, and they help to provide that technical assistance. And I've got a URL here at the bottom of the screen. There's also some additional resources available as part of this presentation that can help you connect to our Find a Forester utility on ODF's website to help you locate your local ODF stewardship forester. And we also have other field foresters out there that focus just specifically on NRCS and some of our other cost share programs that are available to help as well. So as I kind of wrap up, I don't want to go in great detail through long lists of cost share programs. You've already heard about a number of them. Again, they're different in different parts of the state, and so that's where having that local relationship and reaching out is helpful. And if nothing else from this presentation, I hope you get a sense of sort of what are some of the right questions to ask as you start to reach out. So I'm just going to highlight a few here, and these are kind of from the statewide list. I mentioned already our forest stewardship program, which can help cost share the development of a forest management plan. And there are some other options, as you heard in the presentation. You heard Steve talk about working with ODF on some fuels reduction projects around his home and on his property, and that was kind of his start. We do have a lot of those programs available locally around the state through our protection program and our protection division. We've got some community wildfire planners out there on staff. So those are very popular programs that can really help you address kind of the home site acre in particular. And then NRCS and the EQIP program that Andrew talked about, you know, is kind of widening that circle out away from your house, a good opportunity to start thinking about forest health issues, as well as resilience to wildfire and other values that might be important to you as you move out from there. We also partner with the Farm Services Agency on a couple of programs. The Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program provides cost share for establishing forest on streamside areas. This is on agricultural land. And we also work with them on their emergency forest restoration program to help folks recover from natural disasters like wildfire. Steve had mentioned that the two top ones on this list, a lot of SWCD, soil and water conservation districts, do have their own tax base, and they've got their own funding in-house. And so it's always good to reach out and see what might be available. They also have some great folks on staff that can provide good technical assistance around forestry, noxious weeds, a whole host of issues. And it can be great to invite them out for some walk and talk time on your property. Steve talked about the OWEB grants, those small grants in particular that are often available through watershed councils and SWCDs. And there are, you know, finally, there are some small tax incentives that are available. These are kind of limited, increasingly limited over time. There's a forest land deferral, which many of you are probably familiar with. And there are some others around habitat conservation, et cetera. And then the last couple here on the list are related to some of those larger landscape scale programs that we've sort of been touching on, and Andrew talked about some. So I wanted to just shift gears and I'll wrap things up and we'll get to some Q&A. Couple of reminders for folks that if you are working on some of these forest improvement projects on your property, more than likely you do need to also be filing a notice of forest operations with the Department of Forestry. I've got a list here of some of the activities that do require that, and in most cases you're going to be working with your stewardship, the local ODF stewardship forester in some capacity, and they're going to be able to help you to navigate this. It's a free process. It can be done online. I've got the URL there on the screen. If you don't have internet access or you need some assistance working through that, we do have kiosks available in our district offices. I know that's a little bit complicated right now with COVID, but if you called up your local ODF district office, they could give you a hand and help walk you through that process. And I wanted to also highlight that there is a subscriber feature built into Ferns as well. Ferns is our forest electronic reporting and notification system. And that allows landowners to sign up to receive notifications for certain forest practices that might be occurring within their geographic area. I also wanted to talk just a minute about reforestation. This is a pretty important topic. If you do harvest, the Oregon Forest Practices Act does require that you reforest within 2 years of the harvest and that you get those trees free to grow, which means that they are kind of out-competing all the vegetation around them within a period of about 6 years or so. And I just wanted to highlight this because planning for reforestation is really important, especially right now with all the wildfire damage that we've experienced this last fire season and for the last decade or so. Seedlings are really in short supply. And so you can't expect to just go out one day to a nursery and pick some trees up and stick them in the ground. It's really important to be thinking ahead and procuring seedlings well in advance, sometimes up to 2 years or more. And we do have mechanisms to create exceptions if you can't get seedlings for reforestation. But really important to be thinking about securing those in advance and making sure that you're getting the right trees for where you're located as well. Okay, so winding down, I just wanted to highlight a few resources. You're all here at today's Tree School Online, so you're, I assume, familiar with the knowyourforest.org website, which is kind of the home for the Partnership for Forestry Education. There's a lot of really great resources and self-help materials available through that website. Also links that can help connect you with local service providers. And if you take nothing else away from this presentation, then it's really about reaching out and developing the local relationships with the service providers in your area to get a sense for what's available, and then working to develop a plan to implement them. So I think with that, Julie, I'm going to wrap up. We're close to on time, and see if we can't answer some more questions.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. We'll ask Andrew and Steve to come back and join us, but Ryan, maybe you can take this first one. And that is a question of, let's see, is there any financial help from NRCS, ODF, or other organizations for timber crews with a consulting forester?
So, my answer there would be, yes, to the extent that it would potentially be in conjunction with potentially in conjunction with the development of a plan. So we might do that to collect some of the information necessary to develop a forest management plan. But in terms of just doing a cruise alone by itself, that's, I don't know if Andrew's got any ideas there, but.
Generally speaking, no, it would be the same thing that Ryan was talking about. We would help with maybe a forest stand inventory, but you're not going to get the same elements out of a forest stand inventory as you would for the cruise. They kind of take a little bit of a different shape. What we're doing with an inventory is assessing for resource concerns, where a cruise, you're really trying to get down to the quantity, quality of timber stand you have for a harvest. So it's a little bit different than what the NRCS would be providing. Now, FMP, the forest management plan, definitely there's cost share for that, but specifically a cruise, generally no.
Great. Well, thanks again, Ryan, Andrew, and Steve, for your guys' input today, and I think a lot of great information. Just to let folks know, you're welcome to keep typing in questions into the Q&A box. We're going to continue on those questions here in just a few minutes. Also, there's some great opportunities coming up. There's a Managing Eastern Oregon Forest series that's happening, focused on those forests kind of on our central and eastern side. The next one's on February 4th, and that's with Steve Fitzgerald about talking about managing for timber in Eastern Oregon. And then our Tree School Online, like you're attending today, will be continuing on February 16th. And that'll be with Connie Harrington, talking about the biology and management of Oregon white oak. And just a reminder, this webinar will be recorded, as have all of ours that started from last year. And you can go back and take a look at any of those that in the past, or make sure you register for the ones coming up to join us again. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our final poll. And this is just appreciate getting some how about the experience today, and give us any feedback there. And so right now, what we'd like to do is continue again on those questions. And we have, I think, some for each of you. And maybe we'll go to Steve. One came in. And Steve, people applauded you for sharing and really appreciate, I think, your insight on that and honesty. And they ask about project monitoring. So could Steve please detail what post-project monitoring has involved for you in regards to what is expected or systems available to you? For example, do you use mapping primarily for planning and assessments, or for monitoring as well?
Okay. An EQIP program is a contract, and in order to get paid on the contract, you have to show that you got it done. So that involves having your NRCS rep come out and inspect your work. Sometimes that involves, I mentioned briefly, doing a pre-thinning inventory of the stand. Sometimes that's going to involve going out and doing a second inventory to determine what the post-thinning density is. So that would be, part of it. As far as the longer term follow-up, basically the NRCS rep is just going to come out to certify that you've completed the work. So if it's blackberry spraying, they're going to come out and look and see if there's still green blackberries. They're not going to come out and do like the long-term thing. That's more for my personal gratification, but it's also when they happen to come out to talk about your next project, you're probably going to be walking by or driving by your old project. And so they're going to see if those blackberries came back. But to get to your point is the follow-up is basically on the landowner. Of course, the idea is to improve the forest for health, for everybody's benefit, but especially for your own. So there's absolutely follow-up is critical. And as anybody knows who's done forestry practices, is the saddest thing is to come back to an area you worked on 5 years ago and see that your trees have been eaten by mountain beavers and that the brush has grown right back up. That is a tearful moment. So for your own benefit, and it's essential that you go back and visit that stand, especially if you're dealing with invasive species or with planting. You got to visit that stand regularly, at least twice a year, and get in there. And if you see the blackberries coming back, you got to get out that backpack sprayer and go back. If the trees are, if the mountain beavers are coming and munching your trees, you gotta put a better tube on it. Or if the bamboo's broken on your trees flopped over, you got to get a new Vexar tube and another bamboo. So follow up is essential. Are you going to get graded on it 3 years down the road? No, but it's essential for your own well-being and that of the forest. And there was I saw another question in there that I can just get it right away while I'm here. Is there going to be a 1099? And I just got mine on my last year's equip. So yes, there is a 1099. You're going to have to let the tax man know.
Yeah, so let me read that question, and then maybe Andrew or Ryan, you can follow up on both of those if you want. So the question was the cash cost share and reimbursement form of soil water comes in a 1099, which is considered personal income. How does one expense out costs on their taxes? There is a special document that provides advice on this part of tax law. So not to answer in-depth tax question, but I think they're just asking if, one, to let people know, and then anywhere that you want to recommend people might go to read more about that.
Ron was ready to take that one on.
Well, I'll take a first stab and then I'll let you wade in, Andrew. This question does come up and it's a hard one for us to answer. I'm not a tax expert and I can't give tax advice, but yes, indeed, you will receive a 1099 for goods and services provided through a cost share program. And it would be good to work with your tax preparer if you have one, to think about how that fits into your overall tax situation. I do like to remind folks that typically if you're participating in this program, you do incur expenses as you're doing this work, and those should factor into your taxes. I don't know if anyone wants to add more. That's about as far out on the limb as I'm willing to go.
Yeah, that's true. I can touch on that. When I was doing those programs with ODF, as far as where I was hiring the guy with the big machine, that was a substantial cost. And basically, tax-wise, I got the 1099 from the grant. So say it was $10,000, and the machine work cost $10,000. So those things. In general, I'm not a tax professional either, but general, those are going to erase each other out. But if you're doing the work yourself, if you're out there with the chainsaw doing it all yourself, that's income.
Yep.
Thanks. So maybe, Andrew, this was back from when you were presenting, but almost near the beginning, but probably Andrew or Ryan or any of you want to contribute to this. So Lorna contributed, they have logged a little over half of an 80-acre timber stand in Coos County. We've replanted a couple of years ago and are having a lot of trouble with Scotch broom. Want to kind of give advice on how they might tackle that?
Certainly. So that would be one I would work with the local district conservationist. I just looked, I saw that question. I don't know that there's any existing funding pools within that county for forestry related activities. Now that's for EQIP. Because there has been work, there may be a management plan. It may be a good candidate for CSP, for the Conservation Stewardship Program. And there are practices under the Conservation Stewardship Program for invasive species. So at least within our program, you'd have to work with the local district conservationist to see what funding pools. But again, like we've talked about today, we're just one of many other cost share programs that are out there. So if we can't, there's a good chance that the district conservationist will know alternatives within the county. So that would be the best bet. Start with the local, head to our webpage, find the local district conservationist and just give a call, and they'll be able to work through the details at the local level.
Great. So the next one says from Terry, they execute a conservation plan in about 2001. Can you review and possibly enhance that plan? So, kind of, I think it goes along with that. If you've gotten NRCS funds once, can you go back for more? Or what's thoughts about kind of the
generally
control?
speaking, forest management plans, kind of the national standard is 10 years. So they can go through either, generally once you're after the 10-year mark, it would be expired. So you do a full refresh. The nice thing is that it's easy to populate after an expired plan. You've got a lot of the stand delineation done, and not to mention you've got some information that's already there. So a lot of times we get the history. We want to know what's happened on the land so we can base our future conditions or our actions on what happened in the past. So that should be eligible for another round, certainly. And if it's not through the NRCS, then like Ryan said, there's programs that they offer through ODF. So if you don't get an answer that you like one place, I'd say keep being persistent, and there's a likelihood that you'll find what you're looking for. But definitely those rewrites are pretty common.
And Steve, I was going to bring that up earlier, but I didn't want to run us too long. You're in that position, right? You've had your plan for almost 10 years now, and you've gone gangbusters. So what are you thinking about moving forward?
Yeah, there are two different things. Number one is on my first plan, it was only my original 120 acres that were delineated. The 80 acres that I later acquired, I need to wrap that into a plan. So I need to get going on it again, because my plan, the way it was written in 2011, has projects delineated out for 10 years. So I'm coming up on it.
That brings up a great example of Steve, what I've done in the past where people have acquired new lands, and it kind of touches back on a previous question. So what you may look at is those stands that you've worked in and you feel very successful in those. You can set up a monitoring plan just for those. Here are the things that kind of are trigger points. Here's what we're looking for. Here's when we're going to go out and monitor certain criteria within those stands. And then you fold in the new acres and say, here's going to be our approach for the new acres. So you don't just put it off to the side. You say, here's how we're going to actively manage those. And even if that's just a monitoring strategy, that's still active management. So it gives you a plan for those acres that you've already touched. And the nice thing about that, we've touched on it a few times today, there's going to be a revolving door of people. And so you have that plan. You can walk into the NRCS and say, here's what we're doing on these acres. This is what's done in the past. Here's our strategy for the new ones. And we're not walking away from the old acres. There still is something tangible that we can do, even if it's just monitoring quarterly. It gives you action items that you do on those older acres. So I've done that quite a bit, where you add new acres or take acres away, or fire impacts part of the property. And we have to refresh just that part and alter what we had. At one point we had this great plan and fire burned it. So we have to kind of do a refresh. So definitely we can be very creative in how the plans are really meant for you, for the landowner, so we can make them fit your needs. We have a template that we can follow, and that template is to a national standard, but they can really they can really be flexible and malleable to the needs of the land and the landowners, certainly.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so for those that are still with us, thanks for hanging on. This has gone into overtime, so we'll stick around and continue these conversations until about 4:45. And as if we were in person, you know, the great thing is usually when landowners start talking back and forth with one another and giving their advice, and people are chiming in here on the question and answer, that the last question about the Scotch broom, they're also reminding that we might take a look at the county weed control board. That might be another, you know, place for them to go to get assistance with that. And then the other one is, you know, people are also reminding us that we have an extension accountant in the OSU extension, Tammy Cushing, that can also help maybe answer those questions about 1099 and expenses or more. She has some really great things on the Know Your Forest website under the family business section, or OSU has some great information too about accounting expenses. So I think people are reminding us that there's, again, a lot of great resources and information out there. So at this point, we're done through all of our scheduled questions. By just, you know, opening last thoughts or comments that any of you have that you want to share. And then again, just thank all of our participants for coming in today. We know there's a lot of passion out there about people and their land, and we appreciate all that they do to help promote forest health and that improvement. And we know it's a process sometimes to go through these programs, but really know that the people that are available, you know, really also want to help you achieve your goals. So thanks everyone again. And Ryan, Andrew, or Steve, any last things that you wanted to comment on, or any last thoughts that have come to mind?
Oh, I'll just say, right at the end of my talk, I was talking about other people to talk to about resources, and it was the extension forester. Those are the words that I couldn't find. You know, that's another excellent resource, is the extension forester, to have them come out and talk to you about, you know, all kinds of things. But definitely you can wrap the you know, equip programs and stuff into that, because it's you know, back to what Ryan was saying, it's about your relationship with people. And then one other thing I wanted to say is that you know, I've gotten a lot of experience in the last couple of years with pre-commercial thinning, and every time I go out and do a pre-commercial thinning, I go back 5 years later and say, darn it, I should have taken more trees. So words of wisdom: if you're on the fence, take that thing out, because it's just going to be a problem later on.
And I think we have a Tree School Online program for that. Some advice on thinning. So,
Julie, I would throw one other thing out that I know I saw it in the chat as it was going down, but I didn't mention it when I was discussing. I would encourage everybody to take a look at our website, and we do have a number of success stories. So if you're not quite sure, you're probably not on your own. There's probably somebody that's paved the way and had a property similar to yours, and you can look at our success stories, get a feel of their experience, and some, like Steve, some of the hurdles, some of the highs, some of the lows. So it's not brand new as you're jumping into it, but we've got a whole slew, anything from wildlife habitat creation to fire risk reduction. There's a whole slew of different success stories that you can find in there. And then you're hearing from your peer landowners of their experience working with us, working with ODF and other partners. It's a great way to learn some from others' experiences.
it's a great reminder.
And I would just, I'll just close out by saying one reminder that came to my mind is I didn't highlight the Oregon Forest Management Planning.org website, which is a great place to go for resources related to Oregon's uniform plan. We do have a template in Oregon that is approved by a number of different agencies. So by having a plan that has those elements in it, you can automatically qualify for a lot of different programs. So you can get more information at that management planning site. And then I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us, and in particular give a shout out to Steve. I think he and I have been doing this now for 3 or 4 years, and he always makes the job really easy. So I really appreciate you making time to join us, Steve, and be part of the presentation. Yeah, and not to cut out Andrew. Andrew's a great partner at NRCS as well. We work together all the time.
He's the salesman, though. Great job, Steve.
Yeah. Yeah, and someone also mentioned here in the comments, another good reminder for folks is not only do you have your your Oregon Department of Forestry, the NRCS, and the OSU Extension, you also have Small Woodlands Association and your those groups that you can go to, local people, and talk about how they've been tackling projects, as well as someone mentioned here that after they got their forest management plan, then they actually became tree farm certified, and that helped remind them to up their plan every 10 years as well. So I think the start of that, the forest management plans, is such a key part that we all talk about. But knowing there's a lot of resources out there, a lot of incentives for you to do things on your land, and that we're all here to help you if you feel like you are just you have some questions or stuck. Hopefully today you got some ideas about those success stories and how to reach out. So thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks to Alicia for being the co-host today and helping things move along, and appreciate everybody's time and hope everyone can enjoy some time out in Oregon forest. So thanks again for coming today.